Hi, Matt. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Howdy.
Okay, seems like that background noise is under control now. Hi, folks. This is Empowering Democracy. And tonight's topic is, well, I should say, I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I'm here with Dee Peers, who is the host, of the, oh, okay, I know, Around the World with Dee Peers.
Yes, thank you. It's great to be here.
And also the Georgian activist, the Gregory Mallard with the Revolution Evolution on
Yep, that's my name. Don't wear it out.
and YT
And Facebook.
and Facebook. When is your next Facebook stream going to happen, Greg?
I'm going to be getting it all set up and all that, so that way I can live stream using my phone from Facebook so I can discuss various topics and such. But my computer's still on the fritz right now until I get it fixed. Then, yeah, I'll be doing it from my mobile device.
Okay, and we're also joined by Matt Waldie.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, I'm not on camera.
Hi, Matt.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. You're coming in loud and clear.
Good.
And you're in good shape to supply us with your wisdom on the end of neoliberalism.
It is nigh.
When I was thinking about this show, a few days ago, it sort of came to me that the effects of the end of neoliberalism on the American people are going to be a function of how neoliberalism actually ends. Now, we've reviewed on this show, in this series, at least one article that claimed that the end of neoliberalism was here because the battle of ideas had been won by the progressives and the neoliberal ideas were shown to be bankrupt. That was an article written, I guess, 3 weeks ago by Robert Kuttner.
Mm-hmm.
And we reviewed that briefly here.
Yeah,
well, it's.
I don't know if I agree, but
right. Okay, but taking that even as a premise, the fact that maybe we've won the battle of ideas doesn't mean that we've ended the power of neoliberalism or that, it's at an end. We're constantly seeing the power, of neoliberalism continue to reassert itself For example, this whole fight, okay, over the debt ceiling
Mm-hmm.
that we're going through now
Mm-hmm.
has extreme overtones
Yep.
that apply a central idea, okay, of neoliberalism, okay, specifically the idea that there is no government money, there is only tax money.
Yeah.
And there was a piece, I think it was on Splinter, that said that discussed this, and it's nothing more than a dangerous myth. And these people that say that there is no government money, only taxpayer money, they are regurgitating the same premise and nonsense that Margaret Thatcher said
Oh,
back
yes,
in the 70s and 80s.
absolutely. That is a quote from Margaret Thatcher.
Exactly.
That's what
And
she
I,
said.
I cannot help but laugh so hard over this whole debt ceiling argument and think, like, I was watching the CBS evening news earlier, and I just started busting out laughing so hard over it because it's hilarious. Why should a country that is monetarily sovereign and that creates its own currency have to worry about a debt ceiling?
Because politically, they made it so that they had to.
Yes, because politically they made it
Yeah.
so because there
It's a
was
weaponization of our money, making people think that the government can go broke, they can go be in debt, and that's totally not the case.
Yeah.
The U.S. government issues new dollars into existence every single day.
that is absolutely true.
And ever since I have learned the macroeconomic operational reality, as Rocco Million eloquently
Hold on.
puts it, I just laugh at the economic ignorance coming out of DC. It's laughable, but at the same time, it's extremely dangerous to the public.
It's extremely dangerous to the public, and we see it in the debt ceiling crisis because everybody in Washington is taking the debt ceiling crisis so seriously.
A little too seriously.
The two parties are in loggerheads about it.
We
And
need MMT warriors elected.
this is not the first time that it may result in the partial shutdown of the government,
Mhm.
depending on how far the Republicans push it, and also depending on whether the Biden administration fails to respond with the power it can have. In other words, it does have power. It's refusing to exercise the power to end the debt ceiling crisis because it's trying to get some political benefit out of this. We'll go through what power it has at some later time, but I wanted to point to the debt ceiling crisis as one example of how the operational reality is still reflecting the basic ideas, okay, of neoliberalism. But also, there's another example that I want to go to right now. Specifically, there was an article today, okay, in The Intercept. Headline of it is Tom Perez, Tara McGinnis join Neera Tanden on short list for key Biden policy advisor. President Joe Biden is also considering Sarah Bianchi, Ann O'Leary, Emmy Ruiz. Let me bring that article up for you so you can see it. Okay, so there it is. Emmy Ruiz and Carmel Martin to replace Susan Rice as the domestic policy advisor. I don't know what Susan Rice was doing as being the domestic policy advisor, since her whole career has been in foreign policy in the first place. But I look at this list, and what I see is various people who are neoliberals. The first, of course, was Susan Rice herself. But then going over the list of people that we have here, we have Tom Perez, who at one time characterized himself as a progressive, but he was certainly right down the line with the DNC when it came to debt ceiling fights and when it came to the assumption that we can only tax and borrow in order to spend. I certainly believe that he is a neoliberal. And then there's Neera Tanden, the alter ego of Hillary Clinton for so long, who is at the peak of neoliberalism and permits and supports only neoliberal policies. Sorry, I shifted that off from where I wanted to be. Okay, so she is one of the candidates to replace Susan Rice. Then we have Tara McGinnis. She played a lead role in the Biden transition, setting in place the apparatus she'd be managing as the Domestic Policy Council director, but declined to take a role for herself. She's known for her skill at implementation and in the actual work, of monitoring. I think I have to let in
Waldie.
That's you. Hi, Greg. And Matt is here again. Hi, Matt.
Welcome back.
Yeah, welcome back, Matt, if you in fact are here. Okay, so Tara McGinnis closely worked with White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients. Is Matt still trying to get in?
I think so.
Okay, let me see if. No, I don't see him anymore. I saw him before, but I don't see him anymore. So I think he'll try again. Anyway, Tara and White House Chief of Staff Jeff Zients worked closely together in the salvage effort launched after Obamacare's online marketing places crashed on takeoff in 2013. Her 2021 book, Power to the Public, The Promise of Public Interest Technology, is a rare effort to take designing and implementing policy as seriously as the construction of messaging around it, and draws on that and other experiences gained in the government. She founded the New America's New Practice Lab, which examines the way government policy can be used to improve economic security for families. I don't know enough about her to know whether she's a neoliberal, but I suspect that she is too. There's Sarah Bianchi, who was the deputy U.S. trade representative. She has spent her career spinning through the revolving door. After working in the Clinton administration, she moved to the hedge fund Eaton Park. She later served as director of economic and domestic policy for Biden when he was vice president, but didn't serve till the end of his term. Instead, she left to become a managing director at BlackRock, one of the world's most notorious neoliberal firms that champions public-private partnerships all the time, where if the partnerships succeed, then BlackRock happily takes its profits, and if the partnership fails for any reason, the government takes the losses. Classic form of lemon socialism championed by the neoliberals. So, Ruiz was a member of the Mook Mafia on the 2008 Hillary Clinton campaign. I lost. Sorry, folks. I lost the thread on that one again, but I think I'm back. Anyway, she was at first her lieutenant. Okay, was Robbie Mook, but in 2016, she became the lieutenant of Robbie Mook. She now works in the White House as Director of Political Strategy, and Outreach. She's light on policy improvement, which makes her an unlikely candidate. Then there's Anne O'Leary. She's known for her administrative chops. She's taken a number of trips through the revolving door dating back to the Clinton administration. Politico recently described her as a, quote, policy powerhouse with a golden Rolodex to match, unquote. She had a run-in with Gavin Newsom as she represented Walgreens in a dispute with the state over access to abortion medication. She's currently based in California, diminishing the likelihood she'd be offered or accept the role. Carmel Martin has very similar credentials to all the rest of them, but now I'm getting to the point of this excursion into personnel. You've heard the old saying, personnel is policy. All of the people we are looking at here, all these candidates, look like they are neoliberal candidates to head up the Domestic Policy Council, which will be recommending to Joe Biden what he should do over the next 2 years in the realm of domestic policy he should try to pursue and get passed. These personnel choices, I see no hint of anything but neoliberals here among these choices. If the old saying holds true, personnel is policy, we are looking at a continuation of neoliberal policy in the White House.
So basically, nothing will fundamentally change.
Basically,
Exactly.
even though there are chances to change things, no changes go on. Instead, there's a reliance on the neoliberals in key policy positions. As we all know, the neoliberals, I should say the neocon branch of the neoliberal ideology, has gotten us into the Ukraine war, where they have no problem spending, what is it now, $150 million on a fruitless adventure to weaken Russia and to weaken the alliance of Russia and China. The whole endeavor has been very, very damaging to the United States. So, if we look at practice and things actually going on inside of the federal government now, we do not see an end to neoliberalism. Leaving us to the primary topic that I wanted to discuss in this part 5, which is how can we end the operational reality, okay, of neoliberalism. Because just ending their ideas or defeating their ideas is obviously not good enough. They still come forward with their ideas, use those as the basis of their policy. And we have a crisis going on in international relations because they have followed the imperialistic policies, okay, of neoliberalism in Latin America, in Africa, okay, in Ukraine. They're obviously trying to destroy the threat that the combination of China and Russia poses to neoliberalism. So, what can we do? Okay, is there a plan that we can pursue and try to put in place to end the operational reality of neoliberalism in the federal government?
Well, it's going to have to come to dumping the corruption first and foremost. If we're going to stomp out neoliberalism, we're going to have to get rid of all these politicians that are bought and paid for by the big money interests and get people in who actually understand the problems that our country is faced with. You know, everyday ordinary people who know what the heck's going on in their own communities and know how to actually address the problems.
We can build the dump the corruption movement, but we won't be able to get rid of Joe Biden and his toxic foreign policy advisors and also his toxic domestic policy advisors until January 20th of 2025.
Even if we have to, we can, even though I'm against voting in the Democrat primary, even though I'm against the two-party system, we could vote in somebody like a Robert Kennedy.
There is no reason at all why we should not work to defeat Joe Biden inside of the primary, okay, of the Democratic Party. We can work to defeat him. We can work to defend any of his competition, including Marianne Williamson and also Robert F. Kennedy, if they are taking the big money, and any other candidates. And we can do the same for the Congress. We can do the same for the state legislatures. And we should do all this. But we're still not going to change things at that level until January of 2025. So the question is, what can we do until then to ease the problems that we have? Well, we know that we may get some help from the Russians and generally the changes in the international system that we're seeing around us. Because those changes can confront the United States with the need to remove the foreign policy advisors that Biden has picked, specifically because if there is a victory for Russia and a relatively quick end of this war over the next 4 months or so, that will involve a tremendous discrediting of Biden's foreign policy and his foreign policy advisors. And he may be forced to change now. Okay, now, of course, he will still strive to appoint some other neoliberals to those spots. But those people are going to have to talk about changing foreign policy, and they're going to have to talk about a new departure in foreign policy to gain any credibility, okay, at all. So we might get some help in this regard from the international system. We might also get some help from the Republican Party. In fact, I think we may be getting some help right now. They keep on pushing Biden, and pushing and pushing and pushing. If they finally corner him, and it's the last few days before a default, he may come to believe that he has no alternative other than to use the nuclear option. Of course, when I say that, I'm referring to the platinum coin. He may then feel that he has to use the $1 trillion coin and perhaps a few multi-trillion dollar coins to put the debt ceiling terrorists in place and to show them they cannot really terrorize that way anymore. For us, that would be a great opportunity politically if that happens, because of course, that's the proof that there are other ways of financing federal spending other than taxing and borrowing. Specifically, there's the president creating money based on the authority he was given in the 1996 law. Now, of course, it won't exactly be the president creating money. What the president will create is a mandate to the Federal Reserve for them to create trillions of dollars worth of money in the Treasury spending account, which even then will not quite be money. It's trillions of dollars in electronic credits. It doesn't become what we call money until it is spent into the private sector by the Treasury Department. Though that will happen because the Treasury Department needs to avoid a default. It needs to pay back the principal and interest on debt that's falling due, and it needs to spend the appropriations that Congress has mandated previously. So if that happens, we will have the opportunity to say, when the neoliberals say you can only tax and borrow, they're wrong. Look at this. Here's the proof. The federal government has done it. So, are there any other things we can do between now and 2025 to shake the operational reality of neoliberalism?
I always think about what France was doing, out in the streets. If people here got out in the streets, or, the way we're doing online, but there's got to be a large volume of people talking.
If there's a large volume of people talking and a large volume of people attacking the principles, of neoliberalism, that's likely to weaken the operational reality, of neoliberalism gradually as we go along over the last 2 years, or so. If we can weaken the operational reality in that way over the next 2 years, then the larger public will see that neoliberalism has failed, and they will be favorable to other ideologies they will get some new ideas themselves, or they will favor new ideas that come from us. Okay, and that's important because neoliberalism can end in other ways too. It can just end in chaos, where nobody has any faith in it, but nobody has any faith in alternative ways of doing things either. And that can lead to years of chaos and to threats from the right and to elections of very extreme rightists that can really result in a great deal of suffering here in the United States. So that's what we have to avoid. And that's what much of our political activity will have to be dedicated to. Getting people to understand the alternative ways of thinking about things that mean we have to change our foreign policies to a different foreign policy, and change our domestic policies in such a way that they rely on the full power of the government to deficit spend. Now, making these things happen is not going to be easy because the neoliberals are not going to want to adopt a collaborative form of foreign policy. They will oppose it, even though they see the Chinese being more and more successful when they run that kind of foreign policy. Even when they see the influence of China and China's policy, even when they see it rising all through Latin America, they still may be unwilling to adapt and change and to offer our own brand of a cooperative foreign policy. But that's what they're going to have to do for us to retain any friends at all, okay, in Latin America, or any influence at all, okay, in Latin
When
America.
it comes talking about like those countries in Latin, Central and South America, I think in terms of foreign policy there, particularly like Venezuela and many other countries we have sanctions on, it's going to have to take a leader that is willing to sit down at the table with even our elected officials and lift those sanctions and such on those countries.
Absolutely.
And yes, they have goods and stuff that we may want, but that's where trade and negotiations and trade deals come in. That's why you can get by better internationally doing peaceful trade negotiations rather than going in and instituting coups, overthrowing democratically elected governments and all that.
Yes, I agree. And also, when we make these trade deals with other countries, we can't have special conditions on those trade deals that are going to protect our companies if they go into foreign countries. We're going to have to allow those foreign countries to subject the American companies and the American investments that go in there to the laws that the people of these foreign countries support. Because there can't be anything like the ISDS types of trade agreements that we've been pushing for the last 50 years or so. We're definitely going to have to get rid of that. Now, we've done that a little bit to some degree during the Trump administration.
Yeah, and particularly the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and there was also another one which would have been equally as bad, called TTIP, which was, I don't remember what the heck it stood for, but I can look it up.
The TTIP was the was it transatlantic treaty? Okay,
Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership.
Right.
But yeah, all of the any time I hear of a new trade negotiation coming about, I see many millions of American workers being thrown out of the workforce.
Yeah, that was a big problem, but it was also a big problem. By the way, there was a third treaty involved there that was never negotiated, gone by the board. It was one of Obama's brain trials. That was called the Trade and Services Agreement. And it was mostly about the protection of intellectual property produced by Hollywood and other large producers of intellectual property, in this country, who wanted to have their property protected in the trade agreements, regardless of the laws of the guest nations. So that was another big one that was going forward. At that time, but the TTIP was very much like the TPP, but it was basically the TPP for Europe.
Yeah.
And we never were able to conclude that because Hillary Clinton never got into office, and because the Trump administration wasn't interested in pursuing that. Also, the successor to the North Atlantic, to the trade agreement between Canada, the United States, and Mexico, that was negotiated by the Trump administration, took the ISDS clauses out of it, which was a very good thing. And it helped to liberalize trade with Mexico.
And something else that I was just also thinking about in the aspect of lifting sanctions, we're also going to have to lift the sanctions that are currently in place on Russia and Russian goods. That's going to have to be lifted as well.
Yeah, we're going to have to lift those. We're going to have to lift the sanctions on Cuba, on Venezuela. I mean, we have, 30, 35 countries, 80 countries even, that we're sanctioning right now. If we're going to have a different foreign policy, we have to remove all the sanctions, and we have to give people positive incentives for dealing with the United States. That's basically what the Chinese are doing. They're offering deals to people that are beneficial to both parties.
Oh, we're also going to have to lift the sanctions also on Iran and North Korea as well.
Yes.
You know,
and we're also going to have to change the character of the World Bank, and the IMF. So they offer different kinds of loans that are not going to beggar the developing nations. We're probably going to have to end up getting the IMF and the World Bank to actually forgive debts where the countries cannot pay those debts without impoverishing their populations or continuing, to impoverish, their population.
Just like here currently, like there's like one or two, like I don't remember how many countries in Africa there were that had foreign debt to Russia, but Russia forgive them of their debts that they owed to Russia.
Yes.
And it's gonna take a whole lot of doing. It's gonna take quite some time to get the US back in good faith with the countries that hate us. It's going to take a lot of undertaking to make happen, and it's going to have to take leaders coming together saying that the current U.S. foreign policy has been a tragic failure
Yes.
over the last 25, 30, 40 years, and and create a brand new foreign policy which benefits the whole entire world that does not revolve war.
But it may not take as long as we may think if we're willing to forgive the debts, since the debts that the IMF and the World Bank have are debts in dollars that African countries now hold, and that the Latin American countries now hold, and that some of the Middle Eastern countries now hold. Okay, if we can persuade the IMF and the World Bank to forgive those debts by making the IMF and the World Bank the whole, by basically subsidizing their forgiveness of debts, which of course we have the power to do with our sovereign currency. We can easily do that with our sovereign currency. It will go a long way to making ourselves good with foreign countries that we've been exploiting for a very long time if the IMF and the World Bank forgives their debts and they get a clean slate to start over with. That's going to be powerful in convincing them that they may want to deal with the United States again. If we drop the sanctions to everybody, including Cuba, that we've been torturing with sanctions since the 1960s.
And look at all of the good stuff that Cuba currently has, like in terms of medical related stuff. We could be using their technology and all of their stuff that they have developed up here. Like, we lift the sanctions, we normalize relations with Cuba. Like, they're our neighbor to the south, and we need to be getting along with them. And they're like, they've got a vaccine down there for lung cancer that we could be using on lung cancer patients up here in the U.S. And they've got many other medical discoveries that we could be using up here, and they can also coach us through how to implement a universal healthcare system.
They've also got some COVID vaccines, which are very good.
Higher efficacy than what ours is.
I don't know if they're higher efficacy than ours, but I do know they're comparable. And I also know that they would let us have the vaccines for virtually nothing. And of course, that would have a very negative effect on our companies here. But what I say to that is too bad. They've been on the gravy train for long enough. They've made profits that are great enough. They're just going to have to grin and bear it, as far as I'm concerned. And they're going to have to compete with the foreign suppliers, of vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
Because we have to do what's best for the American people here and not what's best for their profits. Okay, so I think we've begun to outline a foreign policy here that would do much to end the operational reality, of neoliberalism. if we could supplement that with the acceptance of MMT at the federal level, and with the willingness to run deficits for the public purpose, we can essentially end the threat of neoliberalism domestically. Because if the government is willing to deficit spend for the public purpose, in those areas where markets are failing, that will create a mixed economic system that is far more socialist than what we have now, but far more devoted to the public purpose, while in those areas where the market can serve us, we can still have our beloved capitalism.
Yeah, and we often, like, I've heard this argument one time before, and it's about like the private health insurance companies, and this is something I've been thinking about. There are people that want to have people pay into like some kind of insurance for firearms. Why don't those people that are in the private health insurance companies get out of healthcare and then go to like firearms insurance?
Well, I don't know. That might be an idea, but I do think that we can't be concerned about the health and the profits of the private health insurance companies. We
That's
have
true.
Medicare for all, and we have to be rigorous in pursuing that. We are now it's gone up now recently to $4.3 trillion per year in total healthcare expenditures that we make here in the United States. If we were to institute a thoroughgoing Medicare for all system, we could cut that down to $2.2 trillion per year.
That's what, like 50% of what, about 45-50% of what we're currently spending on now, and that would add
spending, and that those savings of $2.2 trillion stay in private sector pockets and do not go, as they're going now, to the health insurance companies. Now, essentially, the health insurance companies are vacuuming up of the money from the rest of the private sector to pay the high-level people in the health insurance companies and to give profits to the investors. So that's like a giant tax system that's taxing most of us for the benefit of a very few people. I have to recognize that. We have to stop that. We have to keep the $2.2 trillion in the pockets of the people.
And that, can you imagine what $2.2 trillion back in the hands of the American people? Can you just imagine how better the economy would get?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Healthier.
Oh, yes, absolutely.
Like, that would be, and think about all of these struggling retailers, that would bring back a lot of the retail sector, which has been struggling.
And it would bring back a lot of the economy of the rural areas also.
This is my vision for a really great healthcare system. Abolish private health insurance companies and make Medicare for all a reality. Nationalize the pharmaceutical industry. Nationalize every aspect of our healthcare system. Like, and even have it where, and I hear this debate where there are people that want to see dental, hearing, vision, mental health, and so forth added to that. Add that to the new stuff, to universal health care.
In HR 1976, the bill that has been introduced into the House, it covers dental, covers vision, okay, covers hearing, and it also covers all the rest. There's not much that is left out of that bill other than cosmetic surgery, okay, or something like that. So that would produce a much better healthcare system. As far as nationalizing the providers are concerned, that's, of course, a whole different issue. I would not fight for that from the start because we can get almost as good a result by nationalizing the insurance industry. You know, there's Medicare for All essentially nationalizes the health insurance industry.
And it also, we need to nationalize the pharmaceutical industry as well while we're at it. Like taking, and that's what Mike Gravel laid out in his platform, what he would do. Like, he would take steps and be sure that those steps are in place to have a true national health service.
Yes, I would be for nationalizing the pharmaceutical companies too. And the reason why I would be for that is because that's another instance of market failure. The health insurance companies only work on new pharmaceuticals that they think will make them substantial profits.
Mm-hmm.
Cures that will not make them substantial profits, they are not interested in. So we cannot leave the pharmaceutical field, which is vital to everyone's health, to the private sector, because it creates another market failure where very common sorts of elements are not researched and are not ended because they're not expected to provide very large profits for the companies. Hi, Cora. How are you? Okay, so these are some of the things that we can fight for, and in the fighting for these things and possibly winning these things, which we would win if Dump the Corruption is successful, we would then be in a position to win these other battles. And winning battles like these would end the operational reality of neoliberalism for good, because nobody would be talking about public-private partnerships anymore. Okay, no one would be talking about how the government can't do things anymore. No one will be talking about how the government can't finance things because it's all about the tax money, okay, and the bond money. So,
mint the damn coin already. That would be another key factor into eliminating
the damn coin. Minting the damn coin by the Biden administration.
By Bonnie.
By Biden. Hi, Bonnie.
Hi.
But I don't think Biden will do it. I don't think he will ever be pushed into doing it because he's too beholden to corporations, and we're going to have to get him out.
I agree we have to get him out, and we would do it, okay, with Dump the Corruption. But before then, he still might be pushed into doing the coin, because if the Republicans refuse to compromise and we're on the point of a default, then he has to do one of a few things, okay? As Bob Hockett has been saying, he can simply ignore the debt ceiling.
I love Robert Hockett.
And let the Republicans take him to court. There was a recent great article, okay, by Robert Hockett in Forbes, where he outlined the legal case for the president simply ignoring what the Republicans, okay, are going to do. Okay. I had some exchanges with him on Twitter, in which I complimented him on his article and said,
he follows me on Instagram, by the way.
Said that I really thought that he had set forth an elegant solution, but that I didn't think the elegant solution was as good as minting of the $100 trillion coin. And the reason why I said that is if he mints the $100 trillion coin, it ends debt terrorism forever, because there's enough money there to pay back all the debt as it falls due and to cover the deficits of the United States for an appreciable number of years. And the people will be able to watch as the debt goes down to nothing over a period of time. So no one will be able to scare the people again that there's some huge load of debt that our children and grandchildren are going to be faced with. We're still getting those arguments now, even though many more people believe the government can create its own money. We need something like the $100 trillion coin to provide a demonstration that the government, I don't know what happened here. I don't know. It's Roku giving us a problem. I don't know why. But I
found like a Substack from Robert Hockett discussing the debt ceiling crisis as well. And I've just posted it in our Around the World group chat.
Okay, I may have recently covered it. It might be the same article that I covered a couple of weeks back here. Substack.
Yeah, I'm posting it right now in the YouTube.
Okay, I don't think it's the same one that I covered. Okay, it's a different
It's
one.
It's one that was like shared like within the last 2 or 3 days.
Okay. Okay, good. Okay. Anyway, I think the discussion has gone far enough to point out that we've got to do more to have the end, okay, of neoliberalism. We have to defeat the operational reality, okay, of neoliberalism, not just the ideas, okay, in the abstract. And we've also discussed some of the things we can do to defeat the operational reality, okay, of neoliberalism. So Deborah Wilson said, "You wanted Joey, can't feel sorry for you all." Well, I don't know that we particularly wanted Joey. You've left out the comparison, okay, of the argument, Deborah. Okay, I think Joey has been very, very terrible. Absolutely terrible. Okay, I don't know that Trump would have been as terrible, okay, as Joey. But I think Trump would have been pretty terrible also. So, where you should say you can't feel sorry for us was that we didn't dump the corruption earlier so that we had better choices in 2020. We needed better choices in 2020. We need better choices in 2024. And specifically, we need people all across the United States at every level of government who are not taking any big money. Anyone who is taking big money cannot be elected to office. And Deborah, that includes Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis. They're corrupt. They're taking big money. They can't be allowed to get into office again. The same goes for Biden. And the same goes for almost every member of Congress. What we're about here, okay, is dump the corruption. If you're not about that, then we're really not interested in what you think, because we think the big money is what's caused our political system to deteriorate. And what we're all about here is getting rid of the big money.
Right, I agree. Biden is terrible, but Greg and I both voted independent. We went with Green Party. I just can't vote for the duopoly. It's just too corrupt.
It's entirely too corrupt. Like, what's the point of voting for either? It's like that one South Park episode where they were having like the whole election debacle. It's like picking the giant douche versus the turd sandwich. I don't know if anybody has ever watched that episode of South Park, but yeah, we're particularly in that same analogy right there.
From my point of view, it's not about the parties per se. Yeah, it looks like it's about the parties right now because both parties are rotten. And I certainly agree with that. But the reason why both parties are rotten is because of the influence of money in politics. And the ground truth is that these candidates all across the board from both parties are taking the big money. If we make the big money go away by voting against everybody who's taking it, no exceptions. In other words, if Robert F. Kennedy bases his campaign on big money, no exceptions. We have to vote against him. Same for Marianne Williamson. We have to vote against the people who are taking the big money. If we do that, then guess what? There isn't going to be any big money for the parties either. Because what are the parties going to do with it? They won't be able to siphon it through to the candidates, because if they do, we'll defeat those candidates. So what are they going to do with the big money? They have nothing to do with it, so they're not going to take it. The party system would be totally changed. There might be a Democratic Party, there might be a Republican Party, but they would not be the same because none of the party operatives would be taking the big money. And the party campaign committees couldn't be doing anything with the big money either, because they wouldn't be able to give it to the candidates. The minute they give it to the candidates are gone. So
into the rubbish bin.
So the bottom ground, the ground truth of this, it's the giving of the money to the candidates, either directly or indirectly, which is ruining the system. That's what we have to stop. And by the way, Deborah and everyone else too, we have the power to stop that. You can go through open secrets. You can go through open secrets and you can see who's been taking the money from rich and well-off people, who's been taking the money from the PACs, who's been getting the super PAC money, who's been getting the carry committee money. You can look at all that And with just a few minutes for each candidate, you can determine who is taking the big money. We have tested here already 130 candidates, all the progressives, all the CPC members, 25 of the conventional Democrats, and we're now working on 25 of the Republicans, and we've gone through 2 of them. Altogether, that's 130 candidates. Every single one of them have failed our litmus test. And tomorrow we'll be getting 5 more of them, and I expect they're going to fail our litmus test too. So we're giving everybody the litmus test. Those who fail the litmus test will have to be voted out. The likelihood right now, based on the pardons we've been seeing, is that everyone is going to fail. We've already tested the people we thought would be the cleanest people from taking the toxic money standpoint, and every one of them failed our litmus test because they were taking PAC money or they were taking money from rich people. Really, that's it. That's what it comes down to. It turns out to be a lot simpler than we thought it was going to be at the beginning in order to decide who's straight and who's corrupt.
And after looking at the 9 Georgia congressional Republicans, I can automatically tell you right now that they are about as dirty can get.
I believe that. I certainly believe that. I was looking at one of them last week, I think, in the group that I picked up for last week, and he failed.
Who was it?
Test also. Let me see.
Was it Rick Allen? Was it?
No, it was not. It was. Let me see who I picked up last week. Let's see what it'll get. Through this. I scrolled down too fast. Now I got to go to the top again. But they are here. Okay. Okay, I thought I had the list here, but I don't have it here. Okay, it's a few programs back. But I remember there was a Georgia Republican on that list. Okay. Anyway, I think we've reached the end of the line for this broadcast. I'm going to go back to the beginning now and start on the comments. Okay, so we got the hellos, Lana, Kay Ryan, from Robert Copeland. What the heck is the Mook Mafia? There was a guy by the name of Robbie Mook who was involved in the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2008 and 2016, and he was very young guy, but he was very integral to those campaigns, and he was in part a dirty tricks operative, and he had a number of people working with him, and they were called the MOOC, mafia. That's where the expression comes from.
Yeah, I think those mook assholes. I think they were also the ones. I remember one night in particular, back during the Bernie 2016 stuff, where there were like trolls going around in the Bernie Sanders groups posting child porn, and it was linked back to
Robbie Mook.
Robbie Mook, John Podesta. Who's that other asshole? I can't remember him off the top. David Brock, that asshole. Yes, him.
David Brock. He was working with the Clinton campaign in 2008, but I think by 2016, was it 2016 he was working against them? I don't know. He switched sides, though, somewhere along the line. He got fed up with the Clintons. Okay, Lana Dell asked whether it was Robbie Mook. Yes, by now you know it was Robbie Mook. Lana Dell asked, I was surprised. I liked a lot of what RFK Jr. had to say, have reservations about him, but he is great on foreign policy and the environment. I keep thinking an RFK Marianne Williamson ticket. Yeah, maybe. I'm not sure. The big thing, with Marianne Williamson is she hasn't had much contact with government in the past. Okay, now RFK has never held political office either. Okay, but of course, as a member of his family, and
Neither has Trump.
and as someone in the environmental movement, he's been in, and as a lawyer, he's been in continuous contact with the federal government and how it works through all of the environmental actions. And of course, he has all kinds of friends and contacts inside of the federal government, as well. And of course, he had a great knowledge of foreign policy from the inside, from his family, and also from his studies of foreign policy as well. He's very, very knowledgeable about the subject and about how to change away from a neoliberal foreign policy. I've been watching more of the YouTubes that he has in the last 2 or 3 days, and I've been more and more impressed as I see those. I think he has a great feel for what to do to change us so that we're no longer being run by the deep state. In fact, I think one of his biggest problems is going to be how we can avoid getting assassinated by the deep state, because I think he is a real threat to them. Okay, I don't think Marianne Williamson represents that kind of threat. And that's one of the problems I have with her candidacy. Okay, but even in the areas that she's really strongly for, I don't see the hard edge to her campaign that I would expect from somebody who I would want to fight for these things. She just doesn't come over as a hard edge candidate who's going to fight to the end for certain things. And I think that RFK much more fits that kind of image. That's much more in his personality. I mean, maybe that's true because he's been shat upon for so many years by the establishment in various ways. But RFK impresses me right now as a fighter. And I think we need that kind of fighter inside the presidency. But lest you think that I'm in Robert Kennedy's corner, no, I am not yet in his corner. I have to see how he funds his campaign. if his campaign is funded by any of the big money, then I'm going to apply the rule. I leave it to others to think about how seriously they want to apply the rule. But I think that the Dump the Corruption movement really has to stand for the idea of no exceptions. You break the rule, we're against you. And I think that's the way it's got to be for the Dump the Corruption movement to be successful. Lana points out RFKJ thinks we borrow money from China, needs to update his website because his platform is very vague, and he needs to stay away from the big money donations. 100% agreed, Lana, on all those points. People keep saying we need to march in the streets. People are scared because of police brutality. The French don't lose their health care if they lose their jobs. And they don't lose their health care if they suffer from the brutality of the police. They still get taken care of. And I think that's important. But it's also more likely, because of the police brutality, that eventually the police will be met by equal brutality from our side, from the other side, because brutality is always met with violence and brutality in the end.
They're putting more guns on the streets now.
And as Bonnie says, the industry has been putting more guns on the streets now. If everybody has a gun, there's no way the police are going to get away with the brutality they've been practicing. Robert Copeland said, I like something Greg said on Facebook, and that we need to move toward federal ballot initiatives, but that will be in the future, as only like close to half the states can do ballot initiatives. Okay, but in addition, Robert, we have the problem that at the federal level, we can never get the ballot initiatives going until we
We get enough people elected who support a national ballot initiative measure.
And we can't do that without the corruption campaign.
Like if I were to run for Congress, I would have that on my platform where I would actually support national referendums for things that has overwhelming public support, like Medicare for all would easily pass if we had a federal ballot initiative on that.
Yes. It would also easily pass if the corruption bill is, not bill, but if the Dump the Corruption movement is successful. Dump the Corruption movement is successful, and we have a Congress that is not beholden to donors, then H.R. 1976 will pass the first time next year, overwhelmingly pass. How do I know that? Because 70% of the people are for it, 88% of Democratic voters, and 49% of the Republican voters, and in the neighborhood of 70% of the independent voters. So it's going to pass if the donor-bought Congress people are not there to block it. If the donor-bought big leaders of Congress like Hakeem Jeffries and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are no longer there to block it. So it's going to pass the first time around if the Dump the Corruption campaign is successful. Robert points out Greece had to do severe austerity measures due to the debt that they have had in the past. I've written a book about that, Robert. If you go to my website, it's the book on Greece and austerity in Greece that I wrote in 2015. JosephMFirestone.com. You can get chapter and verse on all that, on how the government of Greece as a democracy was subverted by the Troika okay, in the EU.
Not only that, but also Greece, you have to think about it. They were a currency user, not a currency issuer. If they
Right.
were a
I
currency
was about
issuer, it
to
would be
say
a different
that
story.
if Greece had never joined the EU and remained a currency issuer and continued to be the issuer of the drachma, then they wouldn't have had recourse to severe austerity measures. It
And
was
that's
that.
why Brexit happened. And I supported Brexit from the
Mhm.
MMT standpoint.
So did
And
I.
had Jeremy Corbyn had MMTers in his corner like Patricia Pino and Christian Riley, he would have easily won the election had he stated it from an MMT standpoint.
If he stated it from an MMT standpoint and supported Brexit, clearly supported Brexit instead of all the waffling that he did on it, then he would have won. He wouldn't have been defeated by Bojo. And Robert Coleman said Cuba's a better healthcare system than we do in the United States. Yes, they do. And I believe the Cuban life expectancy has recently passed the United States life expectancy. Robert points out he thinks we can lower health care costs in the United States if we go after the big slumlords. I agree. He points out the same medication in Canada and other countries costs a lot less than in the United States. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why their healthcare expenditures as a percent of GDP are, in many cases, 50% of ours or lower. Robert Copeland says lots of medication is developed at our universities using taxpayer dollars. Yes, the basic medications are before all the fluff is added to them. Commercial private sector is adding the fluff and the marketing to selling these particular drugs. And we become the victims of that. Robert Copeland says a lot of the debt now is just interest on the debt. Not really that much, I think. Okay, in other words, each year we pay interest on the debt. It must be 300 billion a year or 400 billion a year. That's dwarfed by the total debt that we have, and it's also dwarfed by the government expenditures. There's the link to Robert Hockett from Greg. Thanks, Greg. And then Deborah Wilson says,
Yeah, I posted a couple of links and stuff from that were for Robert Hockett, even the Forbes article. Which I posted the Forbes article in our Facebook chat.
Okay, Deborah Wilson said, you wanted Joey, can't feel sorry for you all. Deborah Wilson says, we knew. I suppose she's saying the Trumpists knew.
She was a Bernie supporter.
Huh?
Yeah, if I
were a friend of mine that was that she's a Bernie supporter.
She was a Bernie supporter, but
yes,
in 2020, between Biden and Trump, if I recall correctly, I think she switched over to Trump.
Okay, because she's with real progressives.
Because she thought Biden would be worse than Trump. And I think the story is still not completely told, but right now he's well on his way to compiling a worse record than Trump. Depends on how he takes the victory of the Russians, in Ukraine. If he just takes it, if he swallows it, if he stops the spending, he comes back home and turns his attention to other things, then maybe he will end up but not being as bad a president. Okay. But if he goes on and he tries to double down on the neocon foreign policy that he's been following, he could well end up with a nuclear war, and then there wouldn't be much debate that he was the worst president after all, as Deborah is suggesting. And Robert Coleman says Hillary Clinton would be just as bad as President Biden and former President Trump, maybe worse, Robert. I agree. I mean, she might have gotten us into a nuclear war the first year she was in office. Though maybe not, because the Russians weren't quite strong enough yet. Robert Copeland said, and maybe the Chinese weren't quite strong enough yet either. Robert Copeland says, Greg, I've not seen that episode of South Park. And Deborah says, oh, I got a bail, just saying some people could discern by his background that he would do this to the U.S. and the world. Well, that was a decent guess. I mean, at the time, I thought there was a good possibility of that. But I also thought there was a good possibility that he would be better than he has been. For example, I know that when he first started out, let's say the beginning of the 2000s, his foreign policy then as a senator was not for nation building. He didn't want to go nation building. He was, the person in the White House who was saying, let's not do nation building, in Iraq. He was opposed to it. Okay. Now, he's completely on board with nation building in Ukraine. I would not necessarily have predicted that. Of course, one might have predicted it from the fact that his son was making money from the Ukrainians and from the Chinese, as well. But I really wasn't sure that Joe Biden was quite that corrupt. Anyway. And Dolores says, hello, Deborah. Robert Coleman says, I believe Joe did one Republican that I despise when he was the state assembly here in California by the name of Kevin Kiley. Joe did what? He did one Republican? What do you mean he did one Republican? But I covered Kevin Kiley a few shows ago. I thought he was pretty terrible from the fundraising point of view. Lana said the Gray Zone did a great review of RFK Jr. Yeah, I saw Max Blumenthal's review of RFK Jr., and it was deep, and it was good, I thought. And I agreed with Max's perspective. And Lana says, love MW because she's the only one who's clearly stating she is for Medicare for all. But, as you know, Lana, that is not enough. You can get someone who's clearly stating that she is for Medicare for all, but that doesn't mean that he or she is going to go to the mat for it when they get into office. We have so many examples of candidates who get elected to office and then break their promises. That I just don't take the promises so seriously anymore. I weigh the promises with my perception of the character of the individual, not just the relative honesty of the individual, which I think that Marianne Williamson is relatively honest. But I've noticed Marianne trimming a little bit on various issues, being afraid to take a clear stand because she doesn't want to offend people. I'm not seeing that from Robert Kennedy. Robert, have you read through my pinned post about federal debt? And Robert Copeland said, Lon, I don't think so. And Gregory puts in the 117th Congress, H.R. 1976 bill. Yeah, the Pramila Jayapal introduced bill. It's a very good bill. The only thing is it doesn't take care of the situation which has developed in the Medicare area, where basically CMMI is letting private equity get involved in standing between the doctors and the patients in Medicare. They're undermining the Medicare program internally in the executive branch, and HR 1976, as yet, doesn't have a solution to that problem. But the Trump administration started doing that, and the Biden administration has been following in its footsteps with that. Lana says Greece's debt situation was made worse by policies that weren't really necessary. A lot of people were severely affected, and they had many suicides. Very sad. I hope they're in a better place now. In 2015, their debt situation was relatively small and could have been taken care of by allowing them to run moderate levels, of deficit. But the Troika would not allow that. That is really the bottom line. And the Troika had control of the Greek banks through the electronic connections to the European Central Bank that had been forged when the drachma was given up and Greece shifted over to the euro. In other words, the European Central Bank could shut down the euro from the peoples of Greece, and they no longer had the drachma. So basically, they were able to shut down the stations where people could get their cash out of the bank overnight, if necessary. And the Troika threatened to do that. And so the Greek government at that point didn't have any alternative except to give in to the austerity program. Now, the government of Greece, Syriza, had enough time to prepare the way for that to happen and to develop a different IT system that could have short-circuited that, in my view. But they didn't have the IT capacity in Greece to do that. So they ended up having to cave into the austerity. Of course, that was when Yanis Varoufakis decided to resign from the government and to resume his career as an economist and a lobbyist for better policies. He came back to teaching here in the U.S., but he also was teaching in Athens, and I think now he's primarily based in Athens. Are the universities using tax dollars? Depends on which of the universities we're talking about, right? If they're state universities, there are a lot of dollars they're using that are tax dollars, but there are also a lot of other dollars they're getting from the federal government that are not tax dollars. So it's a mix. Robert Copeland says, dump the corruption on Kevin Kiley. Indeed. Kay Ryan says, okay, I need to go to bed. I love you all. Lana says, good night, Kay. Okay, I think we're kind of done for the evening here. Tomorrow, I'll be back with a Dump the Corruption show and with at least 5 more of the conventional Republicans to cover. As I said, I've gone through 10 of them already. I have another 15 to do. I'm going to try to finish with them as quickly as I can and then go on to the Freedom Caucus and see how the Freedom Caucus raises its funds. see how Marjorie Taylor Greene raises her funds.
It'd be great if Greg can join us. I would love Greg's input.
On who?
Tomorrow?
On who? Marjorie Taylor Greene? Oh, fuck.
You would make for a very lively show.
Okay, cool. I think it was a lively show too. I'm sorry we lost Matt. I think that was just a function of his being at work and his having to set up things in a different way. And it just kept on dropping. It was unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, I think things will be back to normal when he comes to Tuesday's program, as I think he will. Okay, thanks, Greg.
You're
Thank
welcome.
you, Dee.
Y'all have a great night.
Okay, it was a pleasure. And yes, to echo Greg, you all have a great night.
Yes. Good night, everyone.
Good night.